All right, tonight, especially because of the elections coming up, and I think in my heart, because of the elections coming up, and because we were so close to losing Donald Trump, literally, millimeters, if you will, certainly only a few inches, and it makes you realize how important it is to have good leadership. And the Bible, when we read it, the first time you're reading it, one of the things that I don't think Americans are very good at is reading the Bible enough that they really get a feel for what it's saying. Because the first time you read through the scripture, you're just trying to figure out, what is this saying? Who are the players? Where are they located? What are they doing? What's going on here? Once you get to that, then you can peel the layer back another layer, the onion back another layer, and say, okay, God, why are you telling me this? What's going on? What's the point of what you're saying? And there's so many great, powerful lessons for us in the text. And tonight I want to look at three individuals who were terrible leaders, terribly ungodly leaders. And if there's a lesson in this, it's like God does not protect us from evil leaders. There's so many people that would like to believe, well, if I just sit back and pray and God's God and He's in control and He'll protect us, and that's not true. And if we want to see that it's not true, all we have to do is read the Bible. And God puts these lessons in front of us. God empowered you and I to have a say in who runs our lives. And so it's important for us to speak up. And sadly, there's a lot of Christians that just think that getting involved with the political process is some kind of sin, or it's evil, or it's dirty, or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, there's thousands of years of people in many countries that wish they could have gotten involved in the political process. And they just are, honestly, their lives, it's terrible to feel powerless. And that's what so many people feel. So I want to go back. I want to start with Jeroboam the first. Now, we know King David was ruling the throne of what we call the United Kingdom of Israel. There were 12 tribes, and they were united under one king, and that king was David. David passed the kingdom to Solomon, and the United Kingdom of Israel was under Solomon, still 12 tribes. But Solomon was a terrible leader in the end of his life. He turned against God. You can read this if you want to read 1 Kings chapter 11. He turned against God. He did evil. What was in the sight of the Lord? He worshiped idols. He broke many, many of God's commands. And so the year that Solomon died, the people of Israel came to him and said, came to Solomon's son, Rehoboam, who was the heir apparent, and said, your father Solomon made our yoke heavy. Now lighten our yoke and we will serve you. And Rehoboam, who was a brat, been raised in the palace on all kinds of luxury, never probably worked a decent day in his life, didn't know what anything difficult even meant, because everything was handed to him. He said, my father did make your yoke heavy, and I'm going to add to your yoke. And that was a breaking straw for the people of Israel. So they just said, to your tents, O Israel, and the 10 northern tribes of Israel seceded, kind of like we had a civil war from the north and the south in the United States. 10 northern tribes seceded. They made a man named Jeroboam, and he was Jeroboam the first. There's another Jeroboam later on in Kings that is Jeroboam the second, but Jeroboam the first. And Jeroboam the first started out as a really good guy, but let's go to 1 Kings chapter 11. In 1 Kings chapter 11, it talks about Jeroboam and how he was a diligent man and that kind of thing. But as we get, if you look at 26, 1 Kings 11:26, Jeroboam the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zereda, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow. He was a servant of Solomon, but he lifted up his hand against the king. And this is how he came to do that. And so basically, but he was a good man, verse 29. And at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite met him on the road. Now Ahijah had covered himself with a new garment. The two of them were alone in the field. Ahijah took hold of the new garment that he had on. Ahijah was wearing this garment. He tore it into 12 pieces. Verse 31, he said to Jeroboam, take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, said. Behold, I'm about to tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon and will give 10 tribes to you. Down to verse 33, why? Why would he tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon and thus Rehoboam, Solomon's son? Verse 33, because they have forsaken me and worshipped Athtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, Milcom, the god of the children of Ammon. That's some of the gods, among others, that Solomon was worshiping. They have not walked in my ways to do what is right in my eyes and to keep my statutes and my ordinances like David his father did. Now, this should tell Jeroboam something. The reason he's getting the 10 northern tribes is because Judah is worshiping idols and sinning. And that should have burned into his brain. Okay, if I'm going to be a good leader, don't worship pagan gods. that should be, a number one lesson. By the way, same thing for the United States. The United States, I know it's popular right now to say the United States is not a Christian nation. The United States was very much a Christian nation. Go back and read, about the early Congresses. Why is our national motto, in God we trust? That's our national motto. Our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, one nation under God. That's in the Pledge of Allegiance. How'd those things get there? Because people voted them in. Godly men who had a majority in this country voted those kind of things in. So here's Jeroboam. And so basically, then let's go to verse 38 in 1 Kings 11. Verse 38, it will be, says Ahijah the prophet, if you will listen to all that I command you and will walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes to keep my statutes and my commandments as David my servant did, then I will be with you and will build you a sure house as I built for David. Are you kidding me? He's talking to Rehoboam and Ephraim, a man from the tribe of Ephraim. He says, this is my commitment to you. If you will walk in my ways, I'm going to give you the 10 northern tribes, and I will build you a sure house. That's the promise of God to him, just like I built for David. Verse 40, so Solomon was seeking to kill Jeroboam. Because of this, let's go to the next chapter. So in chapter 12, now we would hope that Jeroboam would remember that. In fact, once the northern kingdom makes him king, verse 25 of 1 Kings chapter 12, then Jeroboam built up, or we would perhaps say fortified, Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived in it. Shechem was the very first capital city of the 10 northern tribes. Later on, the capital city moved to other places, eventually ending up in Samaria. So he says he built up Shechem, he lived there. He went out from there, built up Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will return to the house of David. Really? The prophet said, I will build you a sure house, says Yahweh. I will build you a sure house. And he forgot that. It's interesting. When we read the New Testament, and it talks about don't lay hands, meaning don't elevate people to the position of leadership quickly, but let them be tested. People need to be tested. And Jeroboam here, boy, he failed the test. When he was a servant of Solomon, he was a good man, a diligent man. He did good things. He knew right from wrong. But now all of a sudden, he's the leader, and he forgets what the prophet says. And so here's what he does. He says, now the kingdom will return to the house of David, verse 26, verse 27. If the people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. And because of that, verse 28, so the king sought advice, and he made two golden calves, two calves of gold. The prophet had just told him that the reason that he was getting the tribes was because Judah had turned to idols. And he forgets every bit of that. He's not a tested leader. He forgets every bit of that. Instead, he makes two calves of gold. And he said, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Of course, we remember that from Exodus when the Israelites came out of Egypt. Verse 29, he set the one in Bethel, very, very close to Jerusalem, just a few miles away, so the people down south would not be tempted to go into Judah. The other he put in Dan, the far north of Israel. This thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even all the way to Dan. Verse 31, he made temple shrines, and he made priests from all sorts of the people of Israel who were not of the sons of Levi. So if you read Chronicles and other places in Kings, the Levites and the priests, the godly ones left. And so, and basically he kicked them out. And so now he's got idol gods, fake priests, fake Levites. And verse 32, Jeroboam made a pilgrimage festival in the 8th month on the 15th day of the month. Remember, the Feast of Tabernacles that Moses set up was the 7th month, the 15th day of the month. So Jeroboam sets up idol gods. Jeroboam replaces the priests and Levites of God with other people. And Jeroboam then rotated the calendar or modified the Mosaic calendar to make it different from the calendar they were using in Judah. And so he made this feast like the one in Judah, and he went up to the altar. Thus he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the gold calves, the calves he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the shrines that he had made. Verse 33, he went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel on the 15th day in the 8th month, in the month that he had devised in his own heart. And he made a festival for the children of Israel and went up on the altar to burn incense. Now, a phrase that we will see in this teaching, and if you read the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles, you'll see it over and over again, which is that when it says a king, continued in the sins of Jeroboam. These golden calves were still there when the Assyrians destroyed Israel. For some 200 years, the sin of Jeroboam that he started, golden calves, fake Levites, fake priests, and a fake calendar, and a fake religious calendar, that became tradition in Israel. And through all the kings of Israel, that didn't change. There were kings of Israel that added stuff, usually worse, but there were kings of Israel that added stuff. But the primary sin of Israel never changed in some 200 years. And you read in 2 Kings 17 about the destruction of Israel by the Assyrians, and the sins of Jeroboam play a big part. So this is Jeroboam, and what so the people were forcibly removed, if you will, from the worship of the true God, from the blessings of God, from the temple of God, from the priests of God, that when they were walking with God were so powerful. And those people were removed by bad leadership. And you and I have a choice and a chance to speak into leadership in our country, the United States of America, local leadership, state leadership, federal leadership. We have a voice, and our prayers make a difference as well. We have a chance to pray and make a difference. Let's move forward to 1 Kings chapter 16. So we're in 1 Kings chapter 12. So let's go to 1 Kings chapter 16. And in 1 Kings chapter 16, we're going to start in verse 29. And if you start in verse 23, in the 31st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri became king over Israel. And if you look at the chronology, and by the way, the chronology of this period of time in Kings becomes very confusing. And the reason it becomes confusing is of because of the friendships between the north and the south. So the north, Israel, they were Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, and Jehoram. And then the Bible makes things much more difficult by spelling Jehoram two different ways: Jehoram, J-E, and just Joram. So Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, and Jehoram or Joram. Now, Judah at the same time is Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joram, also spelled Jehoram, and Ahaziah. So at the same period of time, Israel has Ahaziah, Jehoram, or Joram, and Judah has Joram or Jehoram and Ahaziah. So when you're reading about Ahaziah or Jehoram, you've got to figure out, wait a minute, is this a Judean king or is this an Israelite king? It can get pretty confusing. But what it does do is it shows us how close the kingdoms were. They were naming their kids after each other because the Judeans, again, the Judeans had fallen into idolatry as well. And so there was some closer ties between Israel and Judah than there should have been. And there should have been a nice clean break, but as it turned out, there wasn't. We'll read about that. So basically, now we're going to drop down to verse 29. In verse 29, it says, in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri became king over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel in Samaria for 22 years. So by this time, the capital city of Israel had moved to Samaria. Verse 30, and Ahab the son of Omri did more evil in the eyes of Yahweh than all who were before him. Verse 33, and as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat. This is so amazing. From God's perspective, what Ahab did was so horrible. It would have been a light thing for him to only have golden calf idols, only have fake Levites and priests, only have a false calendar. But he did so much worse than that. He did more than the evil than all that were before him, a light thing to walk in the sons. What did he do? He took Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, as a wife. And he went and worshiped Baal and served Baal and worshiped him. So Jezebel, and this is part of the story that we'll have to learn after the rapture, because we have no clue as to why all of a sudden Ahab of Israel would marry Jezebel, the daughter of a Phoenician king. We don't really know, but she was horrid and she worshiped Baal. And of course, the next thing you know, Elijah and Jezebel's prophets are having a showdown, and there's 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the groves, which was another step of idolatry. So she was a classic idolater. And so what happens then? Verse 12. So Ahab erects, verse 12, an altar for Baal at the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. And Ahab made the Asherah, and Ahab continued to do more to make Yahweh, the God of Israel, angry than all the kings of Israel who were before him. And, while we're looking at that, we're in 16. Let's go to 18. Now, it wasn't just enough, and this is a good lesson. It wasn't just enough that Jezebel and Ahab worshiped Baal. They had to get rid of people that didn't think that was right. And that becomes really important because we look at 1 Kings chapter 18, and it says in verse 4, verse 3, Ahab, there was a famine in the land, that type of thing. Ahab called for Obadiah, who was over the house. Over the house in the REB is capitalized because it's a title. Over the house is the man who is over the palace. We call him the top dog palace administrator. Now, Obadiah feared Yahweh greatly, for when Jezebel cut off the prophets of Yahweh, wait a minute, what? It wasn't good enough for her to support with people's taxation 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophets of the groves, and all the other crap that she was doing, but she has to kill the people that disagree with her. And we have to be aware that that's a tactic. When we see character assassination, when we see genuine assassination, when we see people that just can't stand it if you differ with from them, you have to believe like they do about sexual variety. You have to believe like they do about 55 genders or whatever there are. You've got to believe like they do about the fact that whatever, all this stuff. If you believe differently than they do, they're mad, they're angry, they're bitter, they're hurt. Where's that come from? Here it is in the Bible, guys. You want to know what the devil would like to do to each one of us? He'd like to kill us all. John chapter 8, he was a murderer from the beginning. And of course, they murdered Christ. Then they murdered a lot of other people. And here's Jezebel, and she kills the prophets of Yahweh. And Obadiah had hid them. And that's something, there's a great lesson there. If you're thinking you're going to be nice to people who disagree with you, and therefore they're going to love you, if a person is a dyed in the wool, anti-God, that isn't going to work. And that's one of the reasons that we have to meet force with prayer and force ourselves. So she killed off the prophets of the Lord. Let's go to 1 Kings. We're in 1 Kings 18. Let's go to 21. In 1 Kings 21. And this is the kind of person that can get into leadership. In other words, okay, we're reading a record here. I'm sure there were a lot like it. God put this one in the Bible to teach us something. So we're supposed to read this and not just learn the history. We're supposed to learn the history, but we're not supposed to just learn the history. We're supposed to walk away with a lesson, maybe actually multiple lessons. Verse 1, and after these things, and there was a lot of stuff there between, chapter 18, 19, 20. And after these things, Naboth the Jezreelite. Now, in the meantime, what had happened when Ahab married Jezebel, they went into the Megiddo Valley, and there's a mound in that valley, and they built a palace on it, and that would generally be their summer palace, and that palace was called Jezreel. So the woman is Jezebel, the palace is Jezreel, and it's in the Megiddo Valley. And Naboth, where they built their palace, Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard that was in Jezreel next to the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. So Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, "Give me your vineyard so that I can have it for a garden of herbs, because it's nearby, next to my house. And for it, I will give you a better vineyard than it. Or if it seems good in your eyes, I will give you its value in silver." Now, the law of Moses says, don't move the ancient landmark. So Naboth is going to here refuse the king, not because he thinks the king's giving him a bad offer. The king probably would have given him a better vineyard. The king probably would have given him a lot of silver, but because Naboth feared God, that's why he wouldn't sell his land. And we've got to get this. This ends up being a record of the godless versus the godly. And Naboth is a godly man. Verse 3, that's why it says in verse 3, but Naboth said to Ahab, "Yahweh forbid me from giving the inheritance of my fathers to you." That's precisely correct. Yahweh did forbid that. Verse 4, so Ahab came into his house sullen and angry because of the word that Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. Yeah, and that's honestly how ungodly people react. They don't say, "Oh, you know what, Naboth? You're right. Gosh, I forgot about what Moses said. I forgot about what Yahweh told Moses, how he told Moses that we were to live. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that." No, instead, they're mad at the word of God. When the word of God talks about proper sexual behavior, when the word of God talks about personal moral behavior, when the word of God talks about controlling your thoughts, those kind of things, the ungodly are mad at that. And now they want to, in some countries, they're calling the Bible hate speech. Well, yeah, why? Because people that are ungodly hate what God is doing. And so, so what's Ahab, the godless man, what's his reaction? When Naboth tells him the word of the Lord, he's sullen and he's angry. And he said, for Naboth had said, "I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers." And then here's the king of Israel. And he behaves like a petulant child. He lay down on his bed and turned away his face and wouldn't eat any food. That is a class A pout. It's like, come on, you're the king. Really, honestly, this is the way you're going to behave. So, verse 5, but Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, why is your spirit so sullen that you do not eat any food? Verse 6, and he said to her, because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, give me your vineyard for silver, or else if you like, I will give you another vineyard for it. But he answered, I will not give you my vineyard, which is sort of what he said, but he also talked about the word of Yahweh. Verse 7, then Jezebel, his wife, said to him, now you will exercise your kingship over Israel. Arise and eat food, and let your heart be merry. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. Verse 8, now here's the totally godless person, though. Again, why is this important to us? This is the queen. She's the second most powerful woman in the kingdom. The first most powerful woman in the kingdom was always the king's mother. Not always, but usually the king's mother was more important than the king's wife, because usually he had a bunch of them and that kind of thing. But in any case, she's an incredibly powerful woman. I think in this case, she's more powerful than Ahab. So she writes a letter in Ahab's name, sealed them with a seal. Watch this. And sent the letters to the elders and to the nobles who were in his city and who lived with Naboth in his city. And that's important because these elders and nobles knew Naboth. They knew the kind of person he was. And they get this letter from Jezebel. And I give up. The Bible doesn't even tell us why these people would agree to exterminate Naboth's entire family. We'll read here that they killed Naboth, but of course, if you killed Naboth, the persons who get the field is his children. If we read the full record through First and Second Kings, then you find out that, well, she not only killed Naboth, she killed all of his children. So she sends this letter to these elders and nobles. Verse 8, who lived in the same city as he did. Verse 9, and she wrote in the letter saying, proclaim a fast and set Naboth at the head of the people, which would be pretty easy. He was a godly man. Verse 10, then seat 2 men, sons of Belial. In other words, find some worthless, truly worthless, evil people before him and have them testify against him, saying, you cursed God and the king. Then bring him out and stone him so that he dies. And the men of his city, the elders and nobles who lived in his city, did as Jezebel sent them to do. You got to be kidding me. They'd be better off dead. And I'm not kidding. They would have been better off dead than to murder an innocent man and show up at God's judgment. And that, people just get spineless. They get threatened and they get spineless. You and I, why did God put this in the Bible? You and I look at this and go, wow, forewarned is to be forearmed. We've got to have some fortitude. We've got to speak up. Yes, it may cost us something. But what does Christ say in the Sermon on the Mount? Blessed are you when people persecute you and say all kinds of evil things against you because of me. That's what Christ said. And it's really true. We've got to fortify ourselves. These guys, it just kills me. They did as Jezebel said. They proclaimed a fast, set Naboth at the head of the people, 13. Then 2 men, sons of Belial, came in and sat before him. The sons of Belial testified. By the way, technically, the sons of Belial is a technical term, meaning that they had given their lives over to the devil. The sons of Belial testified against him, against Naboth, in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth cursed God and the king. Total lie. The elders knew it. Jezebel knew it. Ahab knew it. They knew it. Nobody said a word to defend Naboth. They brought him out of the city, stoned him with stones, and he died. And like I say, we can just go there. Go to 2 Kings chapter 9. We're going to go all the way forward to 2 Kings chapter 9, just a second. And in verse 26, when it's time, Jezebel's about to die, verse 26, and this is, I believe, Jehu talking, and he says, now, verse 26, surely yesterday I've seen the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares Yahweh, and I will repay you on this plot of ground, says Yahweh. And of course, Ahaz was eventually killed, and so was Jezebel. But anyway, so let's go back to 21. Let's see, is that where we were? Yeah, 21, 1 to 16. So um, going down. Uh, yeah, so they've stoned him to where he died, verse 14, 1 Kings 21:14. Then they sent to Jezebel saying, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. And of course, the focus is on Naboth. He was the godly man. We know that also his children were dead as well. Verse 15. And when Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite that he refused to give you for silver, for Naboth is not alive, but dead. Now, was Ahab scandalized that a godly man and his family were murdered? No. Verse 16. When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab rose up to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. This is the kind of evil leadership that can rise up, and why you and I have to pray for our leaders, and why your voice and my voice makes a difference in what happens in our lives. Let's go forward. We're in 1 Kings 21. Let's go forward to 2 Kings chapter 9. Now in 2 Kings chapter 9, and this is something that's good to do, is just like start in 1 Kings chapter 1, read through 1st and 2nd Kings, kind of get a history. But there was a man named Jehu, and he was anointed to kill the house of Ahab and Jezebel, which he did. I wanted to point out in 2 Kings chapter 9, if we go down to verse 16, it says, Then Jehu rode in a chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram was lying there. And Joram had been in a battle. He was wounded. He was sick. As it turns out, when Jehu gets there, he's going to kill Joram, and he's going to kill Jezebel. But now we read this interesting phrase, verse 16. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to see Jehoram. Now remember, I told you that the last two kings are read, Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, Joram of Israel, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joram, Ahaziah of Judah. So there was a closeness. And so when Jehoram was wounded in the war, who goes down to see him but the king of Judah? And so he goes down. Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come to see him. So now let's go forward to verse 21. And Jehu's approaching on his chariot. Jehoram said, Harness my chariot. They harnessed his chariot. Then Jehoram, king of Judah, went out. Now you've got Jezreel, and coming from the west is Jehu. He's coming down the valley, and he's obviously would have had some other chariots with him. And here Jehoram, king of Israel, goes out. Whoops. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, each in his chariot. They went out toward Jehu and met him on the property, of Naboth the Jezreelite. Ooh, that's pretty telling, where Naboth had been killed, and Ahab took possession of that. So so this becomes really important then to realize that Jehoram and Ahaziah, the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, were close enough that they were riding out together to meet Jehu. Now, they didn't know that Jehu had been anointed to kill Jehoram and Jezebel. So they're going out to meet him to see what's going on. In verse 22, and when Jehoram saw Jehu, he says, Is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, How can there be peace so long as the prostitutions of your mother Jezebel and her witchcraft abound? Joram turned his hands, turns his hands about. He's guiding the chariot with the reins. He turns his hand about and fled and said to Ahaziah, Treason, Ahaziah. Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and struck Joram between the shoulders. The arrow came out through his heart, and he slumped down in the chariot. Then they said, throw him in the property of Naboth, whatever. Verse 27, dropping down a few verses. Now, when Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw this, He fled by the road to Beth Hagan. But Jehu followed after him and said, kill him too. And they struck him in his chariot at the ascent of Gur that's by Eblim, and he fled to Megiddo and died there. And his servants brought him to Jerusalem and buried him. And then starting in verse 30, Jehu goes to Jezreel, and Jezebel is killed. Now, what happens next, though, we're in 2 Kings 9. 2 Kings 10 is about Jehu killing off the house of Ahab and the prophets of Baal. And then 2 Kings 11. Now, Ahaziah, king of Judah, is dead. Joram, king of Israel, is dead. Yeah. But Ahaziah, king of Judah, is dead also. So what's going to happen now? Verse 1. Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, now she's got a choice. If her son's dead, who's the next king? One of his sons. She's the grandmother. She's got grandchildren. She can step in now and do good things for her grandchildren and position them to do well in Judah, position them to be able to be good kings, position them to have a good kingdom, even fortify against any possible incursions in the near future from Israel. That's not what she does. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah and grandmother of all his children, saw that her son was dead, she set out to destroy all the royal seed. Now you're talking serious evil here. This is a lady who's going to murder her grandchildren so she can be queen. And she does. She does. Thankfully, verse 2, but Jehoiada, the daughter of, but Jehoshabeth, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, he and his nurse, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and hid them in a bedroom. And they hid them from Athaliah so that he was not killed. And he was with her, hiding in the house of Yahweh for 6 years, while Athaliah reigned over the land. So they snuck him from this bedroom in the palace to the inside of the temple, where Athaliah, this godless woman, she is not going to go into the temple. And they managed to keep this young man out of sight inside the temple for years. And he's the Christ line. This is the line to Jesus Christ. It gets down to him right here. And the Jehoiada the priest, keeps him alive in verse 4. And in the 7th year, Jehoiada sent and brought the commanders over hundreds. Now, Jehoiada the priest, he is an amazing strategist and a godly man, and I believe walking by the Spirit of God, because he brought the commanders over hundreds of the Karaites. That's part of the army and guard of Judah, and of the guards. So he doesn't try to bring everybody because he doesn't trust everybody, but he brings the commanders in, brought them to the temple, the house of Yahweh, cut a covenant with them, had them take an oath in the house of Yahweh, and he showed them the king's son. And he commanded them, saying, this is the thing you are to do. A third part of you, of those who are coming in on the Sabbath. Now, he's pretty smart. He waits till the Sabbath, because on the Sabbath, the priestly shift changes. So you have the priests that are serving, they're supposed to leave, but they don't leave. And so nobody pays attention when a whole bunch of new priests come in. So all of a sudden, he's got double the manpower that he would have had before. So this is really, really smart stuff. So then he commanded them, okay, you were coming out the Sabbath to keep watch over the king's house. Verse 6, a third part are to be at the sure gate. A third part would be at the gate behind the guards, because there was a walkway, a path, as far as we can tell, from the palace directly to the temple. And he's going to guard that so that people, Jezebel's guard and stuff don't come pouring out of the palace to kill the young king that they've just revealed. And you are to keep watch over the house to defend the child. Verse 6. Verse 7, the two companies of you, all who go off duty on the Sabbath, don't leave. Instead, you are to keep watch over the house of Yahweh on behalf of the king. You must surround the king, every man with his weapons in his hands. He who comes inside the ranks is to be put to death. Be with the king when he goes out and when he comes in, meaning all the time. So that they weren't kidding around here. Somebody starts to want to get next to the king, you just kill him. Verse 7, the two companies of you, all who go off duty on the Sabbath, are to keep watch over the house of Yahweh on behalf of the king. I just read that. Okay, verse 9, I'm sorry. So verse 9, so the commanders over hundreds did according to all that Jehoiada priest had commanded. Each one of them took his men, those who were going on duty on the Sabbath and those who were going off duty on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. Verse 10, then the priest gave to the commanders over hundreds the spears and shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of Yahweh. So the temple had weapons in it, and Jehoiada passed those out. Verse 11, the guards took a stand, each man with his weapon in his hand, from the south side of the house to the north side of the house, in front of the altar and in front of all the house, all around the king. Verse 12, then he brought out, and when it's really safe and he's completely got the area cordoned in, he brings out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony. In other words, he gave him some of the law of Moses. And they made him king and anointed him and clapped their hands and said, long live the king. Verse 13, when Athaliah heard the noise of the guards and of the people, she went to the people in the house of Yahweh. And she looked, and behold, the king stood by a pillar, as the custom was, with the commanders and the trumpeters by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced and blew trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her clothes and cried out, treason, treason. And there's a great lesson in this. Wait a minute. Who's committing treason? She just killed the king, the legitimate heirs of the king. She just killed them all. They're children, and she just killed them all so that she could be queen instead of the legitimate child of David being king. Who's committing treason here? And this is a great lesson. When people are demonized, when people are insane, when people are so greedy they can't see straight, they're going to blame you for what they're doing. Athaliah was absolutely committing treason and murder and probably a whole bunch of other sins. But she sees the true king and yells, treason, treason. My gosh, it just drives me crazy because this is so real. This is exactly what happens. The devil's people will blame you for what they're doing. So when you get blamed and you're going, I'm not doing that. And they say, oh, yes, you are. And they're all mad and bitter and angry. And, that's how, the devil wins a lot of arguments just because his people are more angry, more forceful, and godly people just, we just want there to be peace and love and whatever, and you can't make them peaceful or loving. They're going to be mad and hateful and energetic and loud, and that's what she was. And she's cries out, treason, treason. Watch Jehoiada's response. He doesn't give it a second thought. Jehoiada the priest commanded the commanders of hundreds who were set over the army and said, bring her outside of the temple to the ranks and put her to death, and put to death by the sword anyone who follows. For the priest said, let her not be put to death in the house of Yahweh. So they seized her, and when she went through the way that horses enter the king's house, she was put to death there. And at that time period, that's what you could do to evil leaders. And that happened a lot in the Bible. God will do the same thing on the day of judgment. If you read Revelation chapter 20, starting in verse 15, God raises the evil dead and judges them and throws them into the lake of fire where they are put to death. And now there you do have people that say, well, God's a good God. He would never put anyone to death. And that's a false premise. The false premise is God is good, therefore God wouldn't kill. That's not the proper argument. And thankfully, to my first degree in philosophy and some of the good teachers that I had, I learned how to talk through and think through arguments really well. God, who is a loving God, gave people a choice. And he said, you can live or you can die. It's your choice, and I will do whatever you choose. And that's what we think of in love. Love gives people a choice and allows them to be who they want to be, do what they want to do. And so God says, John 3:16, whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And those are the two choices. People can perish or they can have everlasting life. And so, we see patterns in the Bible where evil people are killed off. And we see patterns when Jesus Christ, Isaiah 11 says that when Christ comes back to fight the battle of Armageddon, he will kill the wicked. Revelation 20 says at the final judgment, when God raises the dead, he will finally kill all the wicked. They will be completely annihilated and exterminated, and that will be the end of them forever. So what do we learn from these records? We learned that the devil is incessantly trying to put people over us who are evil, who will remove us from God, who will set up idols against God, who will lie and murder to keep their control. And you and I want to, first of all, we want to make sure we're speaking the word, because some of those people will believe. Some of those evil people will hear at some level and turn from darkness to light. So we want to keep speaking the word. You don't want to ever get bitter in the face of persecution. Christ in Matthew chapter 5 said, blessed are those who are persecuted. And so we want to keep the fact that we're blessed, keep our positive outlook. God is still God. No evil person can or will dethrone him. God's hope will come to pass, and we've just got to keep speaking. But as we can, let us speak up for godliness and speak against evil and see if we can keep evil repressed in the society in which we live. And that having been said, thank you so much for your time and attention tonight. It's been a blessing to share this with you.